With great power comes great responsibility, but some people just fail to handle the prestige of being an authoritative figure in the community. Police officers are meant to protect the people and ensure that everyone and every place is safe. While most law enforcement officers stay true to their oath and never shy away from risking their lives to fight crime, there are some who choose the path of corruption. Unfortunately, corruption finds a way to seep into every profession in the world, and even the highly regarded institutions such as the government or police are not immune to it. In recent years, numerous police officers have been exposed for being unbelievably corrupt. They harmed innocent people, took lives, and manipulated the justice system, but once they were caught, there was no way for them to escape the consequences of their actions, and today they're serving time for their crimes. Join us as we look at the 10 most corrupt police officers who were caught and got jail time. Eric DeValkenaere. Eric DeValkenaere is a former Kansas City police officer who was arrested for taking the life of an innocent man named Cameron Lamb. On the day that he died, Lamb had been arguing with his girlfriend. The argument became physical, and subsequently, they left the residence with Lamb chasing her. Meanwhile, the police were investigating a crash, and they had received reports of a red pickup truck chasing a purple Ford Mustang. From a police helicopter, officers had spotted the truck that was driven by Lamb, and they followed it home. Eric and his partner, Troy Schwam, were in the vicinity and responded, and they found Lamb backing his pickup truck into the garage of the house. The detectives, being members of the Violent Offender Squad, were tasked with preventing and interfering with violent crimes. Both detectives entered the property without identifying themselves or even seeking permission to walk onto the property itself. They didn't even possess a legal warrant and were dressed in plain clothing while wearing police department vests. DeValkenaere pointed his service weapon at Roberta Merritt, who lived with Cameron. After instructing Lamb to turn off the engine and get out of the pickup, he then yelled that he had a gun and fired 4 shots in rapid succession. The shooting transpired within 9 seconds of the detectives arriving at the front yard of Lamb's house. DeValkenaere, who is white, was found guilty during a bench trial in November of 2021 by Jackson County Circuit Court presiding judge James Dale Young. He was sentenced to 3 years for taking Cameron's life and 6 years for armed criminal actions. Judge James ordered that the sentences be served concurrently. Prosecutors had recommended that the 43-year-old Eric be sentenced to at least 9 years. Valkenaere's defense argued that there was no evidence that he intended to target Lamb when he went onto the property and did so only to protect his partner, Troy Schwam. Lamb's stepfather, in a statement to reporters, would say that he hoped the verdict and jail sentence would shake up the police department and give people more of a voice in justice. While convicting Valkenaere, the judge said that he had violated Lamb's constitutional rights, as the 2 detectives had no probable cause to believe that he had committed any crime. He had no warrant for Lamb's arrest and didn't have a search warrant or consent to be on his property. Sergeant Wayne Jenkins. Anyone who's heard about the book or the crime television series called We Own This City is probably already aware of the atrocities that were committed by Sergeant Wayne Jenkins and other members of the disgraced elite unit called the Gun Trace Task Force. Described as perhaps the most corrupt police officer in history of Baltimore police, Jenkins was the head of this task unit that was found responsible for astonishing amounts of abuse in the troubled U.S. city. The job of the unit was to take illegal weapons off of the streets. Instead, though, members of this task force resold the weapons that they stole, robbed dealers, and also planted false evidence. In January of 2018, the 37-year-old former ringleader Jenkins would plead guilty to charges of robbery, racketeering, and civil rights violations that involved the planting of illegal substances on 2 men back in 2010. He would be sentenced to 25 years in federal prison by the U.S. District Judge Catherine C. Blake. She actually split the difference between the 20-year sentence that Jenkins had requested and a 30-year sentence that the prosecution sought. She refused a more lenient sentence, stating that Jenkins had functioned as an illegal substance dealer with a police badge. According to her, he admitted to putting poison into the community when he should have been protecting it. Deterrence is important. Jenkins was seen crying in court at the time of his sentencing, and he apologized, saying, "I am so sorry, Your Honor, so sorry to the citizens of Baltimore. I know it's my fault. I know I have to be punished." The crimes of Jenkins and his task force would span over 7 long years. They also committed overtime fraud. Jenkins would apologize to the family of Albert Davis, a man who had lost his life in a car chase that was started by Jenkins and two other officers. It would later be revealed that illegal substances were planted in the target's car in order to justify a police chase that should not have happened. Other members of the task force were also convicted on federal charges. Marcus Taylor and Daniel Herschel were convicted in February of 2018 on charges of racketeering, robbery, and overtime fraud, and all of the task force's victims were black men, several of whom were dealers whom the corrupt officers knew could not approach authorities. Assistant U.S. Attorney Leo Wise was quoted telling the judge that Jenkins operated his unit like a criminal gang and had inflicted immeasurable harm to the community. Michael Dotreau. Michael Dotreau is a former Edison police officer. The former officer used a pair of jugs filled to the brim with gasoline to begin a fire at the home of Edison Police Captain Mark Anderko in Monroe Township in 2013. He intended to take the life of Anderko and showed no regard for the fact that at the time, his wife, 2 children, and 92-year-old mother were all inside of the house. Fortunately, none of them would be injured. Dotreau had previously pled guilty to arson and attempted murder. He admitted setting fire to the house of Mark Anderko, which was heavily damaged in the incident. He would receive a total of 20 years for attempting to take the life of Anderko, a first-degree crime, and 10 more years for aggravated arson for setting the fire in May of 2013. These 2 sentences would run concurrently. He was also given 10 years for official misconduct, 5 years for conspiracy to tamper with a witness, and 18 months for conspiracy to retaliate. According to reports, he set fire to the house after he was ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation after his 11th excessive force complaint. The psychological assessment occurred 4 days prior to the incident. When he entered the courtroom, his wife could not control her emotions and shouted at him, "You're a monster, you're a manipulative monster." Dotreau resigned from the Edison police force during his trial, and after the 2013 arson attempt, authorities further investigated his behavior and filed 17 additional charges against him. They also discovered that he had bought a controlled substance while on duty at a previous time. In March of 2013, he and his wife had slashed the tires of a 25-year-old woman who worked in the police department. She had filed a complaint against Dotreau, claiming that the married patrolman was harassing her. He even accessed the department database to find the criminal mischief complaint against him. Brass knuckles, a fake weapon, and a club were also recovered from his duty bag. His wife would be charged with hindering for allegedly providing false information during the investigation, official misconduct, conspiracy, and criminal mischief. Dotreau did not speak, neither did he express any remorse for his actions during his sentencing. He has to serve 17 years of his sentence before becoming eligible for parole. Roy Oliver. Roy Oliver was a police officer in Texas within the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. On May the 5th of 2017, Oliver was one of the officers who responded to a 911 call reporting several underage children drinking, walking around at a party of almost 100 people. When they arrived at the location, the officers allegedly heard a weapon being fired that created panic amongst the crowd. Officer Roy would fire 3 rounds into a vehicle. Jordan Edwards, a 15-year-old African-American boy who was riding in the front passenger seat, ultimately lost his life in the shooting. The boy was unarmed during the encounter. And besides Edwards, 2 of his brothers and friends were also inside of the vehicle. His 16-year-old brother was driving the car and was held in police custody overnight for the purposes of being questioned as a witness. Originally, the police had stated that there was an unknown altercation with a vehicle backing down the street towards the officers in an aggressive manner. But after reviewing the body cam footage, Police Chief Jonathan Haber agreed that the vehicle was not even moving towards the officers, rather it was driving away from them. Oliver was fired from the police force as a result of this incident in May of 2017 after being placed on administrative leave. Chief Haber in his statement said that Oliver's behavior did not meet the core values of the police department. An investigation would be conducted into the incident by the Dallas County Sheriff's Department and the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. Oliver would be charged in May of 2017 and an arrest warrant was issued. He then turned himself into the police on the very same day but was later released after posting a $300,000 bond. His trial would be postponed twice and finally began in August of 2018. He would be found guilty of taking Edward's life and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. His attorneys appealed the sentence and the guilty verdicts, but in August of 2020, his appeal was rejected by Texas's Fifth Court of Appeals, and both the conviction and the sentence were upheld. Oliver will not be eligible for parole until the year 2026. Joseph Medzanowski. Joseph Medzanowski is now 69 years old and still rotting in prison. The former Chicago police officer was referred to as the most corrupt police officer by a U.S. attorney 20 years ago. This notorious ex-cop played a vile role in a drug sales ring with various gang members and other corrupt police officers throughout his professional career. He was convicted in 2001 for selling illegal substances, shaking down street hands, and even giving the names of undercover cops to gang members. During his 22 years serving as a police officer, he would receive 59 citations for valor and arrest. He was often hailed as a hero and publicly appreciated for his staggering number of illegal substance and weapons busts. But during his time, he was also backstabbing his own department and his city by secretly revealing the identities of undercover police officers to gang members. He was protecting illegal organizations, distributing controlled substances, and supplying gang members with ammunition. Joseph Medzanowski was also found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for racketeering and conspiracy. It was his conviction that would lead to the breakup of the department's gang crimes unit. He was found guilty of all 10 counts that were against him, and the verdict was read in a packed courtroom. His wife and 2 children were present and crying during proceedings. 4 co-defendants were also convicted by the jury for playing a role in the Miami to Chicago ring, which included Omar Feliciano, Lizette Rivera, Mohammed S. Omar Jr., and Elena Lease, who was Medzanowski's former girlfriend. In 2020, the crooked ex-cop requested a reduction in his sentence under the First Step Act that was signed into law by then-President Donald Trump back in 2018, but in 2021, a federal judge denied him any relief. The judge wrote that he led a double life and managed to deceive even those who were closest to him. He damaged numerous lives, not just his own. Medzanowski was also convicted of extorting money to fix state criminal cases and accessing law enforcement computers to check for possible warrants as a favor to a suspect. However, his defense lawyers would argue that Joseph just had an unorthodox style of investigating street gangs and was an honest police officer who had made thousands of arrests. Derek Stafford. Derek Stafford is a former deputy Marksville marshal who was involved in a harrowing crime. On the night of November 3rd of 2015, officers Derek Stafford and Norris Greenhouse would attempt to stop a vehicle that was being driven by Christopher Few. The man's son Jeremy Martis was a passenger in the front seat. Few and his girlfriend Megan Dixon had gotten into an argument at a bar and were taking separate vehicles home. She reported seeing Few drive past her with a police car with 2 officers following him. Stafford and Greenhouse activated the patrol car lights, but Few still failed to pull over. This would lead to a 2-mile car chase that ended in a dead-end street near the Marksville State Historic Site entrance. The 2 police officers fired 18 rounds of ammunition into Few's vehicle at around 9:30 p.m., despite the fact that Few had both his hands in the air. As a result, Few was injured, but his son Jeremy would lose his life. The entire ordeal would be recorded on police body camera footage. The other 2 police officers called for backup and were also involved in the unfortunate event. Jeremy was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2 and was just a first grader at the time of his death. Colonel Mike Edmondson of the Louisiana State Police began an investigation into the incident and emphasized that the video recorded by the body camera was essential to the arrest of the involved officers. Judge William Bennett of Louisiana's 12th Judicial District Court would be assigned to the case, and he issued a gag order that prevented all involved parties from discussing the case with the press. During trial, both Stafford and Greenhouse remained under house arrest. The jury found Stafford guilty and then sentenced him to 40 years in prison, half of which would be served without any benefit of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. Greenhouse pled guilty to negligent homicide and malfeasance in office in September of 2017. He would be sentenced to 7 years in prison, but was released after serving only 21 months of his sentence. According to the Attorney General prosecutor, the stark difference in the sentence of the two was due to the differences in their actions. Brian Devaney, Sean Dolan, and Devon Smith. Brian, Sean, and Devon are the former Sharon Hill police officers who were charged with taking the life of an 8-year-old child. The young girl, named Fanta Belidi, was walking home with her mother after a football game at the Academy Park High School back in August of 2021. The 3 officers were present at the site and fired their weapons in response to a fire that they had heard in the vicinity that wasn't related to the football game. The 3 officers targeted a black Chevy Impala, which they assumed was where the shots were coming from. The vehicle was just passing the exiting crowd, of which Fanta and her mother were a part. Fanta would lose her life because of the over-eagerness to fire their weapons. The 2 men responsible for the initial shots, Angelo Ford and Hassine Strand, were charged with first-degree murder for Fanta's death, but they later took a plea deal, and this charge was withdrawn. The 3 officers, on the other hand, were facing 12 criminal charges on counts of reckless endangerment and death. However, as part of a plea deal negotiated by the district attorney, the second charge was stopped. Fanta's family also approved of the deal and considered it an act of accountability, and the officers admitted to their wrongdoing. The family did not want to relive the painful tragedy that took their little girl away from them in a jury trial on the more serious charges. As misdemeanors, the 10 reckless endangerment charges, each carrying a maximum of 2 years in prison. This meant that the officers faced up to 20 years in prison, and the sentencing was set for January 12th of 2023. No matter how long or short the sentence may be, going to prison is inevitable for the 3 former officers. Once the sentencing is complete, the family's attorney, Bruce Castor, will move forward with the civil case. According to him, "I want justice to take its course here in Delaware County, and then we'll move forward with the civil case." The family is also insisting on more training and police clarifications from Sharon Hill Borough Police Department. Charles Becker. Becker was a lieutenant in the New York City Police Department between the 1890s and the 1910s. He would be convicted in the Becker-Rosenthal trial and is regarded as the only officer who was executed for crimes that connected him to his official performance. The 42-year-old lieutenant had gotten himself involved in the criminal underworld of New York. He allegedly used his position to extort significant sums in excess of $100,000 from Manhattan brothels and illegal gambling casinos, and in return he would offer immunity from police interference to those businesses. He also delivered percentages of the take to various politicians and other police officers. Herman Rosenthal was a flamboyant Estonian immigrant who ran a number of illegal casinos in the Tenderloin district. He was irritated by a police raid that was led by Becker on one of his casinos, and that resulted in property damage. He went to the press and revealed that Becker used to collect 20% of the take. Becker would be reported as one of 3 officers who were involved in extortion from Rosenthal casinos. The day that he was supposed to testify before a grand jury, Rosenthal was murdered at 2 a.m. in the morning while leaving the Hotel Metropole. Lefty Louis, Whitey Lewis, Dago Frank, and Gyp the Blood were the ones who attacked him, and they made no efforts to hide their identity. All of them were separately tried and convicted, and they were sentenced to death, eventually being executed. Manhattan District Attorney Charles S. Whitman, who was to interview Rosenthal before his death at the hotel, alleged that the 4 men did this at Becker's behest. Investigations would continue in the matter, and on July 29th of 1912, Becker would then be arrested. He was tried and convicted in a trial that was presided over by John Goff. The guilty verdict of the trial was overturned, as Goff had been openly biased against Becker, and then there was a retrial in 1914 in which Becker was again convicted and sentenced to death. He was the first police officer in the history of New York to receive this penalty. Becker still maintained that he was innocent, and according to him, Jack Rose, Harry Valam, Sam Sheps, and Bridgie Weber all served as prosecution witnesses, and they all threw him under the bus in order to save their own skin. He also said that there were other underworld criminal figures who were involved in the matter, but the district attorney promised them immunity in exchange for testifying against him. William Vasquez Baez. William Vasquez Baez is a 53-year-old former officer of the Puerto Rico Police Department. He previously pled guilty to 1 count of participating in racketeering conspiracy and 1 count of conspiracy to take someone's life in connection with his agreement to assist an illegal substance trafficking organization. This organization shipped illegal substances to New York and distributed them from a Bronx daycare center. William would be engaged in a litany of crimes while working secretly for the traffickers. While working on behalf of this organization, William distributed thousands of kilograms of controlled substances. According to U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, Vasquez-Baez abused his position as a police officer in order to help a vicious organization distribute and massacre citizens that he had sworn to protect. Federal prosecutors revealed that between 2004 and 2016, he would help a gang by protecting their territory and trade through his numerous acts of violence. The group allegedly paid him a salary in order to use his position to assist their trade. Prosecution also said that the gang had paid him to help gang members in taking down a man named Anthony Castro Carrillo. He was also accused of taking a confidential informant hostage and then delivering them to the gang, pretending to be police officers, who then took the informant's life. Early in 2022, a federal judge by the name of Jesse Furman sentenced William to 30 years in prison. In addition to jail time, he was also sentenced to 3 years of supervised release. Daniel Holtzclaw. Daniel Holtzclaw is a former police officer who worked for the Oklahoma City Police Department. Holtzclaw would be accused of assaulting multiple African American women over a period of 6 months between December of 2013 and June of 2014. The list of his sexual crimes is quite long and absolutely horrifying. He targeted the poor, a majority black portion of the city. Investigators revealed that he did background checks on women with outstanding warrants or other criminal records and then methodically targeted these women. Holtzclaw would be arrested in June of 2014 after he had finished his shift on the northeast side of Oklahoma City and was driving home in his police vehicle. During the drive, he made a traffic stop without reporting it to police dispatch. He ran a records check on the driver named Jeannie Liggins, a 57-year-old woman who was passing through the impoverished area. Unlike his other targets, Jeannie was neither poor nor did she have a police record, but despite that all, he assaulted her and forced her to perform unspeakable acts. Liggins promptly filed a police report, and the next day Holtzclaw would be taken by the department's sex crimes unit for questioning. He was arrested 2 months later on August 21st of 2014. Eventually, after a prolonged and deep investigation, police were able to bring together 13 women who were willing to testify against him. The earliest incident would be discovered from December of 2013. He had been on paid administrative leave until he was charged in August and was fired in January of 2015. His trial began on November the 2nd of 2015 with him facing 36 charges. Holtzclaw pled not guilty to all of them. In December of 2015, he would be convicted on 18 of those charges, and the jury recommended that he serve 263 years in prison. His attorney requested a new trial, alleging that evidence was withheld from the defense, but the request was quickly denied by the judge. Oklahoma City Police Chief Bill City released a statement that read, "We are satisfied with the jury's decision and firmly believe justice was served." Holtzclaw made an appeal, but it was denied on unanimous opinion in August of 2019 by the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. He would make another petition in March of 2020, which was also denied by the Supreme Court of the United States.